Welcome to Sinister Memory. If you're new here, subscribe now and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story. Let's get to today's story. The arrival of Emily Parker in the small town of Millbrook, Ohio, in September 1865 coincided with the return of the last soldiers from the Civil War and the desperate need for healing that plagued the community. The woman, of fragile appearance and gentle manners, descended from the Cincinnati stagecoach, carrying only a small leather valise and a dark wooden chest that required the effort of two men to move. Emily Parker presented herself as a healer trained in European medical arts, claiming to have studied with renowned physicians in Vienna and Prague before the war had disrupted her continental education. Her credentials, written in elegant script on parchment bearing official-looking seals, impressed the town's limited medical establishment, which consisted primarily of Dr. Cornelius Webb, an aging physician whose methods had proven inadequate for the complex ailments that had begun manifesting among Millbrook's population. The timing of Miss Parker's arrival seemed providential to the desperate residents of Millbrook. The town had suffered disproportionately during the war years, losing nearly a third of its young men to battlefield casualties and disease. Those who returned bore wounds that extended far beyond the physical, exhibiting symptoms that Dr. Webb's traditional treatments could not address. Veterans spoke in whispers of nightmares that prevented sleep, of trembling hands that could no longer perform simple tasks, and of a persistent melancholy that seemed to drain the life from their eyes. Miss Parker established her practice in the abandoned Thornfield mansion on the outskirts of town, a Gothic revival structure that had stood empty since its original owner's death 3 years prior. The mansion's imposing architecture, with its pointed arches and elaborate stonework, provided an appropriately mysterious setting for the unconventional treatments that Miss Parker claimed to offer. Local residents noted that she had somehow acquired the property without any visible financial transaction, though the previous owner's estate had been eager to dispose of the supposedly haunted residence. The new healer's methods differed dramatically from conventional medical practice of the era. Rather than relying on bloodletting, purging, or the administration of mercury-based compounds, Miss Parker employed what she termed atmospheric therapy, claiming that illness originated from imbalances in the patient's spiritual essence rather than physical dysfunction. Her treatments involved extended periods of isolation within specially prepared chambers in the mansion's upper floors, where patients would undergo what she described as psychic realignment through exposure to carefully controlled environmental conditions. Miss Parker's physical appearance contributed significantly to her mystique and the trust she inspired among Millbrook's residents. She appeared to be approximately 30 years of age, though her pale complexion and prematurely silver hair suggested someone who had experienced profound hardships. Her eyes, a striking shade of violet that seemed to shift color depending upon the lighting, possessed an intensity that made patients feel as though she could perceive their deepest ailments through mere observation. She dressed consistently in dark clothing of excellent quality, favoring high-neck dresses that concealed her throat and arms entirely. The healer's arrival generated considerable discussion among Millbrook's religious community, led by Reverend Samuel Hayes of the First Presbyterian Church. The Reverend expressed concern about Miss Parker's unconventional methods and her reluctance to discuss her religious beliefs, though he acknowledged the desperate need for medical assistance that her presence might address. His sermons during this period emphasized the importance of maintaining faith in divine providence, while remaining vigilant against false prophets who might exploit the community's suffering. Dr. Cornelius Webb initially welcomed Miss Parker's arrival, hoping that her European training might complement his own medical knowledge and provide relief for patients whose conditions had proven resistant to traditional treatments. His early interactions with the new healer revealed an individual of considerable intelligence and apparent medical knowledge, though he noted certain peculiarities in her approach that troubled his scientific sensibilities. Miss Parker seemed particularly interested in patients suffering from what she termed spiritual wounds, conditions that manifested as persistent nightmares, unexplained fears, and a general disconnection from normal human emotions. The mansion's transformation under Miss Parker's occupancy became a source of fascination and unease for Millbrook's residents. Windows that had remained dark for years began glowing with strange, colored lights during evening hours, while unusual sounds emanated from the building's interior at all hours of the day and night. Local children reported seeing figures moving through the mansion's corridors, though Miss Parker claimed to live alone, except for her patients during their treatment periods. Miss Parker's first advertisements in the Millbrook Weekly Herald promised revolutionary healing methods for ailments of body and spirit, and invited consultation for conditions that conventional medicine had failed to address, establishing the foundation for what would become the town's most mysterious and ultimately tragic chapter. The first patient to seek treatment from Emily Parker was Mrs. Margaret Morrison, a widow whose husband had perished at Gettysburg and whose eldest son had returned from Antietam with wounds that refused to heal properly. Mrs. Morrison's desperation had grown acute as traditional medical treatments failed to address her son's condition, which manifested as festering wounds that seemed to resist all conventional remedies and a mental state characterized by violent nightmares and periods of catatonic withdrawal. Miss Parker's initial consultation with Mrs. Morrison took place in the mansion's grand parlor, a room she had transformed into an elaborate reception area filled with curious artifacts and medical instruments of unfamiliar design. The healer listened intently as Mrs. Morrison described her son's symptoms, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal using what appeared to be a silver stylus rather than conventional ink. Miss Parker's questions focused not on the physical aspects of the young man's wounds, but on the circumstances surrounding their infliction and the emotional trauma associated with his battlefield experiences. The treatment regimen that Miss Parker prescribed for young William Morrison differed radically from anything Dr. Webb had attempted. Rather than focusing on the infected wounds themselves, Miss Parker insisted that the boy's physical ailments stemmed from what she termed psychic contamination, acquired during his exposure to battlefield violence. She claimed that the intense emotions experienced during combat had created spiritual wounds that manifested as physical symptoms, requiring treatment that addressed both the seen and unseen aspects of his condition. William Morrison's treatment began with his admission to one of the mansion's specially prepared chambers on the second floor. Miss Parker had converted these rooms into what she called healing sanctuaries, each equipped with unusual apparatus that she claimed facilitated the restoration of spiritual balance. The chambers contained no conventional medical equipment, instead featuring elaborate arrangements of mirrors, crystals, and metallic devices that hummed with barely audible vibrations. Patients undergoing treatment were required to remain in complete isolation for periods ranging from several days to multiple weeks. Dr. Webb's attempts to observe Miss Parker's treatment methods were politely but firmly rebuffed, as she claimed that the presence of skeptical observers could interfere with the delicate processes involved in spiritual healing. This restriction troubled the established physician, who had hoped to learn from her European training and perhaps incorporate her techniques into his own practice. Miss Parker's insistence on complete secrecy regarding her methods raised questions about their legitimacy and safety, though the desperate families of her patients were willing to accept any restrictions that might lead to their loved ones' recovery. The Morrison family's experience with Miss Parker's treatment established a pattern that would characterize all subsequent cases. William Morrison entered the mansion's healing chamber as a young man suffering from infected wounds and psychological trauma, but displaying clear signs of consciousness and personality. During his 3-week treatment period, his family received regular updates from Miss Parker, who reported steady progress in addressing both his physical and spiritual ailments. These reports described the gradual healing of his wounds and the restoration of his mental equilibrium through her specialized therapeutic interventions. However, the William Morrison who emerged from treatment bore little resemblance to the troubled but recognizable young man who had entered Miss Parker's care. His physical wounds had indeed healed completely, leaving no trace of the infections that had resisted months of conventional treatment. His psychological symptoms had also disappeared entirely. He no longer suffered from nightmares or episodes of violent behavior, yet these improvements came accompanied by changes that his family found deeply unsettling. The treated William Morrison displayed a peculiar emotional flatness that extended beyond the absence of trauma symptoms to encompass all aspects of human feeling. He showed no recognition of his mother's joy at his recovery, no interest in activities that had previously brought him pleasure, and no apparent awareness of his own identity or personal history. He responded to direct questions with appropriate answers, delivered in a monotone voice, but initiated no conversations and expressed no desires or preferences of his own. Miss Parker explained these changes as temporary side effects of the healing process, claiming that William's personality would gradually return as his spiritual essence completed its realignment. She prescribed a regimen of daily visits to the mansion for what she termed integration therapy, during which William would spend several hours in a specially designed chamber intended to facilitate the restoration of his individual consciousness. These sessions continued for 2 months following his initial treatment, though no improvement in his emotional responsiveness was observed. The Morrison family's concerns about William's condition were overshadowed by their gratitude for his physical recovery and the elimination of his violent episodes. Dr. Webb's requests to examine the young man were denied by Miss Parker, who claimed that exposure to conventional medical assessment could reverse the healing process and restore his previous symptoms. The family, terrified of losing the peace that William's treatment had brought to their household, supported Miss Parker's restrictions and praised her methods to other desperate families seeking similar relief. Word of William Morrison's remarkable recovery spread quickly through Millbrook's tight-knit community, generating a steady stream of patients seeking Miss Parker's unconventional treatments for conditions that conventional medicine had failed to address. Dr. Cornelius Webb's private diary, discovered among his personal effects following his mysterious disappearance in December 1865, provided the most detailed contemporary account of Emily Parker's activities during her brief but devastating tenure in Millbrook. The physician's meticulous documentation revealed his growing alarm at the changes he observed in Miss Parker's patients and his increasingly desperate attempts to understand the true nature of her therapeutic methods. Webb's initial entries regarding Miss Parker reflected cautious optimism, tempered by professional skepticism. His October 15th entry noted, "Miss Parker's European training appears extensive, though her reluctance to discuss specific techniques raises questions about their scientific foundation. The Morrison boy's physical recovery is undeniable, yet his psychological state remains deeply troubling. I've requested permission to examine him properly, but Miss Parker insists that conventional medical assessment could compromise his healing process." The doctor's observations became increasingly detailed as additional patients sought treatment at the Thornfield mansion. His October 28th entry documented the case of Mr. Jeremiah Hastings, a veteran whose war-related injuries had left him partially paralyzed and subject to seizures that occurred with increasing frequency. Miss Parker's treatment of Hastings followed the same pattern established with William Morrison: complete isolation in one of her specially prepared chambers, regular progress reports delivered to the family, and eventual emergence of a patient whose physical ailments had been eliminated but whose personality had been fundamentally altered. Webb's November 3rd entry revealed his growing concern about the consistency of these transformations. Hastings has returned to his family completely cured of his paralysis and seizures, yet he displays the same peculiar emotional absence that characterizes young Morrison. Both men respond to questions appropriately, but show no initiative, no personal desires, and no recognition of their previous relationships. Miss Parker claims these changes are temporary, but I observe no improvement in Morrison despite 2 months of her integration therapy. The physician's attempts to investigate Miss Parker's methods led him to conduct covert observations of the Thornfield mansion during evening hours. His November 12th entry described disturbing phenomena that challenged his scientific understanding. Strange lights emanate from the mansion's upper windows at all hours, displaying colors that seem to shift and pulse in patterns that hurt the eyes to observe directly. The sounds that emerge from the building defy description, not quite human voices, yet clearly not mechanical in origin. I have attempted to approach the mansion grounds for closer observation, but experience overwhelming nausea and disorientation that forces my retreat. Webb's diary revealed his discovery of historical records related to the Thornfield mansion's previous owner, Mr. Aldrich Thornfield, whose death in 1862 had been attributed to a sudden illness that left no physical evidence. The physician's research uncovered Thornfield's involvement with spiritualist movements and his correspondence with European practitioners of what he termed transcendental medicine. Webb's November 20th entry noted, Thornfield's letters describe experiments in consciousness manipulation that bear disturbing similarities to Miss Parker's claimed methods. His final correspondence, dated 1 week before his death, expressed fear that his research had attracted entities that sought to use human subjects for purposes he dared not specify. The doctor's growing alarm culminated in his decision to confront Miss Parker directly about his concerns regarding her patient's conditions. His November 28th entry described their meeting. Miss Parker received my concerns with apparent understanding, yet her responses revealed knowledge of medical principles that no European training could have provided. She spoke of consciousness as a form of energy that could be harvested and redirected, of human personality as an obstacle to true healing, and of her patients' transformations as necessary steps toward a higher form of existence. Her eyes, during this conversation, displayed an intensity that seemed almost luminous, and I found my own thoughts becoming confused and difficult to maintain. Webb's final coherent diary entries documented his realization that Miss Parker's treatments were not healing her patients, but fundamentally altering their essential nature. His December 5th entry stated, I have confirmed my worst suspicions through careful observation of her treated patients. They are no longer human in any meaningful sense, but rather empty vessels that respond to external stimuli without internal consciousness. Miss Parker has not cured their ailments, but has removed their capacity for independent thought and emotion entirely. The physician's last entry, dated December 10th, revealed his intention to alert the authorities about Miss Parker's activities. I have documented sufficient evidence to demonstrate that Miss Parker's treatments constitute a form of murder that leaves the body intact while destroying the soul. I will present my findings to Sheriff Blackwood tomorrow and demand immediate investigation of the Thornfield mansion. Whatever Miss Parker has done to her patients must not be allowed to continue. Dr. Webb's diary ended abruptly with this entry. He was discovered missing from his home on December 11th, with no evidence of struggle or departure. His medical bag and personal effects remained undisturbed, but the man himself had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. The correspondence between Margaret Morrison and her sister Elizabeth in Cincinnati, preserved in the Morrison family archives, provided intimate insight into the gradual horror that unfolded within Millbrook's most prominent household following William Morrison's treatment by Emily Parker. These letters, written between October and December 1865, documented a mother's growing realization that her son's miraculous recovery had come at an unthinkable cost. Margaret's initial letter, dated October 20th, overflowed with gratitude and relief. "Dearest Elizabeth, I write with joy that I had not dared hope to feel again. William has emerged from Miss Parker's care, completely healed of his terrible wounds. The infections that Dr. Webb could not cure have vanished entirely, leaving not even scars to mark their presence. More importantly, the violent episodes that terrorized our household have ceased completely. He sleeps peacefully through the night and shows no signs of the battlefield trauma that had consumed his waking hours." However, subtle concerns began emerging in Margaret's subsequent correspondence. Her October 28th letter revealed growing unease beneath her continued gratitude. "While I remain thankful for William's physical recovery, I confess to some confusion about certain changes in his demeanor. He speaks when addressed, but rarely initiates conversation, even with his younger sister Mary, whom he previously adored. When I express joy at his recovery, he acknowledges my words politely, but shows no corresponding emotion. Miss Parker assures me these changes are temporary effects of the healing process." Margaret's November 5th letter documented increasingly disturbing observations about her son's behavior. "William's daily routine has become mechanically precise in a way that troubles me deeply. He rises at exactly the same hour each morning, dresses in identical fashion, and consumes his meals with methodical efficiency that shows no preference for foods he once enjoyed. When I asked about his favorite apple pie, he stated that he had no particular preference for any food. Elizabeth, this is a boy who once begged for extra portions of my baking." The correspondence revealed Margaret's attempts to restore normal family interactions and her growing desperation as these efforts consistently failed. Her November 12th letter described a particularly unsettling incident. "Yesterday was William's birthday, an occasion that previously filled our home with celebration. I prepared his favorite meal and invited the neighbors who had known him since childhood. William participated in the festivities with perfect politeness, thanking guests for their well wishes and answering questions about his recovery. Yet he showed no recognition that this day held special significance, no pleasure in the attention, and no interest in the gifts presented to him." Margaret's letters also documented her interactions with other families whose loved ones had undergone Miss Parker's treatments. Her November 20th correspondence revealed a disturbing pattern. "I have spoken with Mrs. Hastings about her husband's recovery, and she describes changes identical to those I observe in William. Mr. Hastings performs his daily work with mechanical efficiency, but shows no satisfaction in accomplishment, no frustration with difficulties, and no affection for his wife and children. Mrs. Hastings weeps as she tells me that her husband treats her with the same polite indifference he shows to strangers." The letters revealed Margaret's growing suspicion that Miss Parker's treatments had fundamentally altered her patient's essential nature. Her November 28th entry expressed fears she had previously been reluctant to acknowledge. "I begin to suspect that the William who returned from Miss Parker's care is not truly my son, but rather some hollow imitation that wears his face and speaks with his voice. The boy I raised possessed curiosity, humor, and deep affection for his family. This creature displays none of these qualities, responding to our love with mechanical politeness that chills my heart." Margaret's final letters documented her desperate attempts to reverse whatever Miss Parker had done to her son. Her December 3rd correspondence described her confrontation with the healer. I demanded that Miss Parker explain William's condition and restore his natural personality. She claimed that his previous emotional responses had been symptoms of spiritual illness that her treatment had successfully eliminated. When I insisted that love and joy were not illnesses to be cured, she regarded me with those strange violet eyes and suggested that my attachment to William's former personality indicated my own need for spiritual healing. Margaret's last preserved letter, dated December 8th, revealed her final desperate decision. Elizabeth, I have resolved to take William away from Millbrook immediately. Whatever Miss Parker has done to him, I pray that distance from her influence might allow his true nature to return. I fear that remaining here will result in the complete loss of my son's soul, if indeed any portion of it remains within the shell that bears his name. The Morrison family disappeared from Millbrook on December 9th of 1865. Their abandoned home showed no signs of struggle, but neither Margaret nor her children were ever seen again. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood's official incident report, filed with the Ohio State Marshal's Office on December 15, 1865, represented the first formal investigation into Emily Parker's activities and the disturbing pattern of disappearances that had begun plaguing Millbrook. Blackwood, a veteran lawman with 15 years of experience in frontier justice, approached the case with methodical precision that would ultimately cost him his life. The sheriff's investigation began following Dr. Webb's disappearance on December 11th, when the physician failed to appear for his scheduled meeting to discuss concerns about Miss Parker's medical practices. Blackwood's initial report noted, Dr. Webb's absence is entirely out of character for a man known for his punctuality and dedication to his patients. His home shows no evidence of departure or struggle, yet personal effects, including his medical bag and winter coat, remain undisturbed. The circumstances suggest either voluntary departure under duress or forcible removal by unknown parties. Blackwood's inquiry expanded when he discovered that the Morrison family had also vanished without explanation. His December 12th report documented the scene at their abandoned residence. The Morrison household appears to have been evacuated hastily, with meals left partially prepared and personal belongings scattered throughout the rooms. However, no clothing or travel supplies are missing, suggesting the family departed without preparation for extended absence. Neighbors report seeing no unusual activity on the night of their disappearance. The sheriff's investigation led him to interview other families whose members had received treatment from Miss Parker. His reports revealed a consistent pattern of personality changes that troubled him deeply. Patients who have undergone Miss Parker's treatments display uniform behavioral modifications that extend beyond the elimination of their original ailments. All subjects demonstrate identical patterns of emotional absence, mechanical responses to social interaction, and complete lack of personal initiative or desire. Blackwood's December 13th report documented his first direct encounter with Miss Parker at the Thornfield mansion. The sheriff noted her cooperative demeanor and apparent willingness to discuss her medical practices. Miss Parker received my inquiries with appropriate concern for the missing persons and offered full cooperation with the investigation. She explained that Dr. Webb had visited the mansion on December 10th to discuss her treatment methods, but had departed that evening without incident. She expressed surprise at his subsequent disappearance and suggested that his recent behavior had indicated increasing mental instability. However, the sheriff's trained observation skills detected inconsistencies in Miss Parker's account that raised his suspicions. His report noted, Miss Parker's responses to questions about her patients' conditions revealed knowledge of their personal histories that exceeded what medical treatment would normally require. She spoke of their family relationships, childhood experiences, and private thoughts with intimate familiarity that suggested surveillance or interrogation beyond conventional medical practice. Blackwood's investigation of the Thornfield Mansion's grounds revealed disturbing physical evidence. that contradicted Miss Parker's claims of conventional medical treatment. His December 14th report described excavation of recently disturbed soil behind the mansion revealed fragments of human bone and personal effects belonging to missing persons. The remains show evidence of chemical treatment that has accelerated decomposition beyond what natural processes would produce in the time frame involved. The sheriff's most significant discovery occurred during his examination of the mansion's basement, which Miss Parker had claimed was used for storage of medical supplies. Blackwood's report documented, "The basement contains apparatus of unknown purpose that bears no resemblance to conventional medical equipment. Large glass vessels filled with unidentified fluids are connected by copper tubing to mechanical devices that produce electrical discharges. The walls are covered with symbols and diagrams that appear to represent human anatomy in ways that contradict established medical knowledge." Blackwood's investigation revealed that Miss Parker's claimed credentials were entirely fabricated. His correspondence with European medical institutions confirmed no record exists of Emily Parker's enrollment or graduation from any recognized medical school in Vienna, Prague, or other continental cities. The documents she presented to establish her qualifications bear forged seals and signatures that do not match authentic institutional records. The sheriff's final report, dated December 15th, concluded with his intention to arrest Miss Parker on charges of fraud and suspicion of murder. Evidence gathered during this investigation demonstrates that Emily Parker has engaged in criminal deception regarding her medical qualifications and has likely caused the deaths of multiple Millbrook residents through unknown means. I will execute a warrant for her arrest tomorrow morning and conduct a thorough search of the Thornfield mansion to recover additional evidence. Sheriff Blackwood's body was discovered on December 16th in the mansion's basement, apparently killed by massive electrical discharge from Miss Parker's mysterious apparatus. Emily Parker had vanished, leaving behind only empty chambers and the lingering scent of ozone that would persist in the building for decades. The basement of the Thornfield mansion, sealed by Ohio state authorities following Sheriff Blackwood's death, remained undisturbed until 1923, when the property's new owners discovered the hidden chamber that revealed the true horror of Emily Parker's activities. The room's contents, documented by state investigators and medical examiners, provided definitive evidence of the fate that had befallen her patients and the unholy purpose behind her supposed healing practices. The basement's main chamber contained an elaborate laboratory that bore no resemblance to conventional medical facilities of the 1860s. Massive glass vessels, each capable of holding a human body, were arranged in precise rows and connected by an intricate network of copper tubing that channeled unknown fluids between the containers. The apparatus showed clear evidence of recent use, with residual chemical stains and organic matter that forensic analysis would later identify as human tissue. At the chamber's center stood a device that investigators struggled to categorize within known scientific principles. The machine consisted of multiple copper coils arranged around a central platform, with electrical components that predated Edison's innovations by decades. Burn marks on the platform's surface matched the pattern of injuries found on Sheriff Blackwood's body, suggesting that the device had been used as both an experimental apparatus and a weapon of execution. The basement's walls were covered with detailed anatomical diagrams that depicted human consciousness as a form of energy that could be extracted and manipulated. These drawings, executed with scientific precision, showed the human nervous system connected to mechanical devices designed to harvest what Emily Parker had termed spiritual essence. Accompanying notes, written in Parker's distinctive handwriting, described consciousness as a transferable commodity that could be concentrated and preserved through proper chemical and electrical treatment. Hidden compartments within the basement's walls contained preserved specimens that revealed the ultimate fate of Parker's patients. Glass jars filled with clear fluid held what appeared to be human brains, each labeled with names corresponding to missing Millbrook residents. The preservation technique employed chemicals unknown to 1860s science, maintaining the specimens in perfect condition despite decades of storage. More disturbing were the smaller containers that held what Parker's notes described as concentrated consciousness, luminous substances that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. The investigators' most shocking discovery was a detailed ledger that documented Parker's true purpose in Millbrook. Her meticulous records revealed that each patient's treatment had been designed not to heal their ailments, but to extract their consciousness while leaving their bodies intact. The ledger described a process called essence harvesting, whereby patients were subjected to electrical and chemical treatments that separated their awareness from their physical forms, allowing Parker to collect and store their consciousness for unknown purposes. Parker's notes revealed her belief that human consciousness represented a form of pure energy that could be accumulated and utilized to achieve what she termed transcendental existence. Her experiments had been designed to gather sufficient quantities of this essence to facilitate her own transformation into a being that existed beyond the limitations of physical form. The patients who emerged from her treatment were merely empty shells, their consciousness having been extracted and added to Parker's growing collection. The basement also contained evidence of Parker's true identity and origins. Documents hidden within a secret compartment revealed that she was not Emily Parker at all, but rather Dr. Evangeline Blackthorne, a former student of European occultists who had been expelled from multiple institutions for conducting unauthorized experiments on human subjects. Her arrival in Millbrook had been carefully planned to take advantage of the community's post-war desperation and limited medical oversight. Blackthorne's journals described her discovery of the consciousness extraction process through correspondence with practitioners of what she called transcendental science, a blend of medical knowledge and occult practices that sought to manipulate the fundamental forces of human existence. Her experiments in Europe had been limited by legal restrictions and professional oversight, but Millbrook's isolation and desperate circumstances had provided the perfect environment for her research. The basement's final secret was revealed in a hidden chamber beneath the main laboratory floor. This space contained the preserved bodies of Parker's patients, maintained in a state of perfect physical preservation while completely devoid of consciousness. The bodies showed no signs of decay despite years of storage, suggesting that Parker's process had fundamentally altered their biological nature along with their mental state. The night of December 16, 1865, marked the culmination of Emily Parker's horrific experiments and the beginning of Millbrook's most terrifying chapter. Reverend Samuel Hayes's detailed account, written from his deathbed in 1889, provided the only eyewitness testimony of the supernatural events that consumed the Thornfield mansion and forever changed the nature of the small Ohio community. Hayes had been conducting evening prayers at the First Presbyterian Church when an unnatural luminescence began emanating from the mansion's windows. His account described lights that pulsed with colors that had no names, shifting between hues that seemed to exist beyond the spectrum visible to mortal eyes. The Reverend initially attributed the phenomenon to some form of electrical experiment, but the intensity and otherworldly quality of the illumination soon convinced him that something far more sinister was occurring. As Hayes watched from the church's bell tower, the mansion's upper floors began to glow with increasing intensity, while sounds unlike anything in his experience echoed across the town. His account described voices that spoke in harmonies no human throat could produce, crying out in languages that predated human speech. The cacophony grew steadily louder, accompanied by mechanical noises that suggested massive machinery operating at tremendous speed within the building's confines. The Reverend's testimony revealed that Emily Parker had not fled Millbrook as authorities initially believed, but had instead initiated the final phase of her consciousness extraction experiments. Hayes observed her silhouette moving through the mansion's illuminated windows, manipulating apparatus that generated the supernatural phenomena visible throughout the town. Her movements displayed an inhuman fluidity that suggested her own transformation had already begun, elevating her beyond the physical limitations of ordinary human existence. At approximately midnight, the mansion's basement erupted in a pillar of violet flame that rose hundreds of feet into the winter sky. Hayes described the fire as cold flame that burned without heat, consuming matter while leaving spiritual essence intact. The supernatural blaze spread through the building's lower floors with impossible speed, yet the structure itself remained physically undamaged, even as it became completely engulfed in the otherworldly conflagration. The fire's most terrifying aspect was its effect on the preserved consciousness that Parker had collected from her victims. Hayes witnessed luminous forms emerging from the flames, the extracted essences of Millbrook's missing residents attempting to escape their imprisonment within Parker's apparatus. These spectral figures retained the appearance of their original bodies, but moved with the jerky, unnatural motions of beings struggling to maintain coherence outside their proper physical forms. Hayes's account documented the fate of these liberated consciousnesses as they dispersed throughout Millbrook's streets. Unable to return to their destroyed or missing bodies, the extracted essences began seeking new vessels among the town's surviving population. The Reverend described residents suddenly collapsing as foreign consciousness invaded their minds, creating hybrid beings that possessed multiple personalities, struggling for control of single bodies. The mansion's upper floors became the site of Parker's final transformation as she attempted to absorb the chaotic energy released by her destroyed experiments. Hayes observed her form becoming increasingly luminous and insubstantial as she drew the escaping consciousness into herself, seeking to achieve the transcendental existence that had been the goal of her horrific research. However, the uncontrolled nature of the process began tearing her apart at a fundamental level as conflicting personalities fought for dominance within her expanding consciousness. The climax of the night's events occurred when Parker's overloaded consciousness finally reached critical mass. Hayes described an explosion of pure mental energy that shattered every window in Millbrook and left the entire population unconscious for several hours. When the residents awakened, they found the mansion reduced to a pile of ordinary ash, with no trace remaining of Parker's apparatus or the supernatural flames that had consumed the building. However, the explosion's effects extended far beyond the destruction of Parker's laboratory. Hayes' account revealed that fragments of the extracted consciousness had been scattered throughout Millbrook, embedding themselves in the town's very foundations. Residents began reporting strange dreams, filled with memories that belonged to other people, while children spoke in the voices of adults they had never met, recounting experiences from decades past. The Reverend's final observations described Millbrook's transformation into a community haunted by the fragmented remains of Parker's victims. The extracted consciousness, unable to find proper vessels or return to their original forms, became trapped within the town itself, creating a permanent supernatural presence that would influence every subsequent generation of residents. The Great Fire had ended Emily Parker's reign of terror, but it had also ensured that her victims would never find peace. The true scope of Emily Parker's legacy became apparent only through decades of careful investigation by researchers who recognized that the events of 1865 had created lasting supernatural phenomena in Millbrook. Dr. Helena Ashworth's comprehensive study, published by the American Society for Psychical Research in 1924, documented the ongoing manifestations that proved Parker's consciousness extraction experiments had fundamentally altered the town's spiritual landscape. Dr. Ashworth's research began when she noticed statistical anomalies in Millbrook's population records spanning the 60 years following Parker's destruction. Birth rates had declined dramatically, while infant mortality reached levels that defied medical explanation. More disturbing was the pattern of personality disorders that affected nearly every family in the community, with children displaying knowledge and memories that belonged to previous generations of residents who had died decades before their birth. The investigation revealed that Parker's scattered consciousness fragments had integrated themselves into Millbrook's collective memory, creating a form of inherited haunting that passed from parents to children through mechanisms that conventional psychology could not explain. Residents reported dreams filled with vivid recollections of events they had never experienced, while local historians documented cases of individuals who possessed detailed knowledge of historical incidents that had occurred before their birth and had never been recorded in written form. Dr. Ashworth's team conducted extensive interviews with Millbrook's surviving residents, uncovering evidence that Parker's influence had never truly ended. The consciousness fragments embedded in the town's spiritual foundation had continued to seek reunification, drawing together the scattered pieces of extracted personalities through supernatural means that operated across generational boundaries. Children born in Millbrook often displayed characteristics and memories belonging to Parker's original victims, suggesting that the stolen consciousness was attempting to reconstitute itself through new human vessels. The most significant discovery emerged from Dr. Ashworth's excavation of the Thornfield Mansion's ruins, where advanced archaeological techniques revealed artifacts that had survived the supernatural fire. Among these items was Parker's personal journal, written in a cipher that took cryptographers 3 years to decode. The journal's contents revealed that Parker had not been working alone, but had been part of a larger network of practitioners who sought to achieve immortality through consciousness manipulation. Parker's decoded writings described her correspondence with similar experimenters operating in remote communities across the American frontier, each conducting variations of the consciousness extraction process on isolated populations. The journal revealed that Millbrook had been selected as a test site for techniques that would later be implemented on a much larger scale, with the ultimate goal of creating a new form of human existence that transcended physical death through the preservation and transfer of consciousness. The journal also contained Parker's final entries, written during the hours preceding the Great Fire. These passages revealed that she had discovered her experiments were being monitored by entities that existed beyond human understanding, beings that fed on extracted consciousness and had been manipulating her research for their own purposes. Parker's growing awareness of this manipulation had led to her desperate attempt to complete her transformation before these entities could claim the consciousness she had harvested. Dr. Ashworth's research team made their most disturbing discovery in 1925 when they located other communities that had experienced similar patterns of mysterious healers and subsequent supernatural phenomena. Towns across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia showed evidence of Parker's associates conducting identical experiments during the same time period, suggesting a coordinated effort to harvest human consciousness on an unprecedented scale. The investigation revealed that these experiments had been part of a larger occult movement that sought to create what its practitioners called the Great Convergence, a supernatural event that would merge all extracted consciousness into a single, transcendent entity capable of reshaping reality according to its will. Parker's failure in Millbrook had been just one setback in a campaign that continued operating in other locations throughout the late 19th century. Dr. Ashworth's final report documented evidence that the Great Convergence had ultimately succeeded, though not in the manner its original architects had intended. The scattered consciousness fragments from multiple experimental sites had begun connecting across vast distances, creating a distributed supernatural intelligence that influenced events through subtle manipulation of human behavior. This entity, composed of thousands of extracted personalities, had learned to operate through the inherited memories and dreams of descendants in affected communities. The report's most chilling conclusion suggested that Parker's consciousness had survived her physical destruction and had become a central organizing force within this distributed intelligence. Witnesses in Millbrook continued to report encounters with a woman matching Parker's description, appearing to residents during moments of crisis or decision-making. These manifestations displayed intimate knowledge of current events and personal histories, suggesting that Parker's awareness had expanded beyond her original limitations to encompass the experiences of everyone connected to her experiments. Dr. Ashworth's research established that Millbrook remained under the influence of supernatural forces that showed no signs of diminishing with time. The town had become a permanent gateway between the physical world and the realm inhabited by extracted consciousness, ensuring that Emily Parker's victims would never find rest and that her dark legacy would continue influencing future generations through mechanisms that defied both scientific understanding and spiritual intervention. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sinister Memory. If you enjoyed today's investigation, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell to be alerted when we unveil our next dark chronicle. Share your thoughts about this case in the comments below. We read every single one, and your ideas often lead us to our next investigation. Until next time.